But perhaps at some point, even that wasn't enough. Cornell once sang, "The day I tried to live, I learned that I was alive." And maybe that was his final message, that sometimes just surviving is a victory. But for someone like Chris Cornell, that victory wasn't always enough to silence the unnamed sorrow. And so a voice that had shaken a generation, a soul no one could ever replace, fell into silence in a world that didn't know how to listen until it was far too late. Legacy and influence. The legacy Chris Cornell left behind cannot be contained by the 30 million albums sold worldwide, nor by his 18 Grammy nominations or chart-topping hits. His true legacy lies in something immeasurable, a voice that transcended technique, a musical soul bound to pain, existence, and the quiet self-destruction of the lost and lonely. Cornell wasn't just the soul of Soundgarden. He was one of the defining architects of the grunge movement, alongside Kurt Cobain, Eddie Vedder, and Lane Staley. But if Cobain was rebellion, Vedder instinct, and Staley despair, then Cornell embodied inner conflict, a kind of torment that didn't explode but bled slowly through every note. His voice, spanning nearly 4 octaves, could rise like thunder or fall into a whisper like a confession. It wasn't trained to please, it was trained to speak the things no one dared to say. Songs like Black Hole Sun, Like a Stone, Fell on Black Days, The Day I Tried to Live, Hunger Strike, Say Hello to Heaven. And The Promise weren't just music, they were cultural imprints. Places where people found themselves amid hopelessness, loneliness, and the will to survive. These songs were used in films, memorials, therapy sessions, and wherever they played, Cornell's voice rang out like an admission that weakness is human and pain, when heard, can become something beautiful. To critics, Cornell was hailed as one of the greatest rock vocalists of the modern era. Rolling Stone, Spin, Billboard, Loudwire, and more all named him among the greatest rock voices of all time. But more important than accolades was the way he inspired the next generation, artists across alternative metal and indie genres. Chester Bennington, Dave Grohl, Brendan Urie, Matt Bellamy, Billie Eilish, all called him a model of sincerity in music. Beyond music, Chris Cornell left a mark through his humanitarian efforts. The Chris and Vicky Cornell Foundation continues its work after his death, supporting abused children, the homeless, and victims of trafficking. These were ideals he quietly championed in his final years. He also funded the construction of art centers for underprivileged students, mental health clinics, and youth rehabilitation programs for addiction recovery. His legacy also lives on through tributes and covers. In 2019, a special concert, I Am the Highway, a tribute to Chris Cornell, brought together Metallica, Foo Fighters, Miley Cyrus, Adam Levine, Brandi Carlile, and many others, all sharing one stage to honor a single man. Not because Cornell was famous, but because he represented what many artists never dare to do: to live honestly in pain and to turn that pain into healing for others. In 2023, after years of legal disputes, Soundgarden was finally inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and Chris Cornell's name was etched into the wall of those never to be forgotten. But for fans, he never needed a monument, because Cornell was already one in life. A man who dared to be vulnerable in front of crowds, who sang of death as if it were ordinary, and who faced himself even when the world turned its back. His influence isn't measured by streaming numbers or media mentions. It lives in the moment you play one of his songs during a sleepless night in your lowest hour when you can't find the words and his voice rises not to comfort you, but to say, "I've been there too, and I'm still here." That's the kind of music that never dies. And that's the legacy Chris Cornell left behind. Not immortality, but presence in the truest moments of being human. Chris Cornell's story isn't a biography. It's the journey of a soul that always needed to speak, even if sometimes he didn't know who he was calling out to. If you believe that artists like Chris, those who don't just write music but live inside every lyric, deserve to be remembered, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to keep following these journeys that reach for what's most real. When was the last time you listened to Like a Stone? When was the first time a lyric pulled you back from silence? Tell us in the comments, because some stories only need a melody to come alive again. See you in the next videos, where music doesn't just play, it stays with everything it once saved. Sound like Chris Cornell. Not just a sound, but a voice that was a fight with himself, and the darkness. And with people who never really got him. Cornell was never a name that the media made up. He wasn't the type of star who caused scandals or rock star who bragged about his fame. Instead, he was Black Hole's son, like a stone, or say hello to. He spoke for a whole group of lonely people who were trying to find something to hold on to in a noisy time. He went from being the lead singer of Soundgarden, a band that started the Seattle grunge wave, to traveling with Audioslave through painful and hopeful settings. From a solo artist whose haunting songs were full of self-reflection to a man who killed himself in a hotel room at age 52, leaving behind questions that no one is brave enough to answer. Chris Cornell did not shine like a bright star at the end of the world. He came like rain, slow, heavy, and sometimes scary, but with an undeniable weight. He was the tension between being brilliant and being weak, between being in the sun and being in the dark. Ultimately, he chose to depart in the same solitude that had shaped him. In other words, what made Chris Cornell special? What made a man who seemed unbeatable quietly end his life? This isn't a funeral song. It's the story of a voice that could never be replaced and a soul that never went to rest in peace. Beginnings. Chris Cornell was born on July 20th, 1964, in Seattle, Washington. His full name is Christopher John Boyle. He was raised Catholic in a working-class family with Irish and Jewish roots. Catherine Cornell, his mother, was a middle school teacher and an accountant, and Edward Boyle, his father, was a pharmacist. Christine was the fourth child in a family of 6. She was sensitive and quiet, and she seemed to stand out from the others right away. Cornell once said that while he was growing up, there were no memories, just empty places. When he was very young, his parents split up. His mother got control of her children and changed their last name to her own. They changed their name to Chris Cornell. His family was split up emotionally and physically, so even though he lived with his mother, he always felt like he didn't fit anywhere. Christopher started to show signs of serious depression when he was 10 years old. He didn't discuss anything with anyone or leave the house for almost a year. No one came into his room but him, and he listened to the Beatles all day and night. He listened so intently that he remembered not only every note, but also every pause in between them. It was almost like music was the only thing that was stopping his mind from blowing up. In the future, he would call that time period the year I disappeared. It was a quiet place to get away from the world, and no one even noticed. Cornell said in an interview, "I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't go outside. Absolutely no one knew what I was doing, and I had no idea I existed." Chris's first drug use was when he was 13. It was a dangerous turning point that showed he was going through a lot of problems inside. Even though he was still in high school, he tried LSD, pot, prescription drugs, cocaine, and heroin. They weren't there to help him. Nobody attempted to stop him. He turned to drugs as a way to punish himself and avoid the chaos inside him in a society that was changing quickly. He came from a broken family and felt lonely and overly sensitive. In that empty space, though, Chris found music, which saved him in silence. He learned to play the drums, then the piano, and finally the guitar on his own. They did it all without classes, just by instinct and obsession. It wasn't a dream or a desire to make music, to stay alive. At every keystroke and beat, he decided not to end his life. He never felt like he fit in at school, even though he went to Christ the King Catholic Elementary School and Sherwood High School. Chris was seen as strange, distant, hard to read, and quiet by his peers. He was even thought to have a slight form of autism. Despite not talking much, he remembered every word, note, and shift in tone in a song. That's how his brain worked, but not for everyday things. To make ends meet, Chris did odd jobs at restaurants around Seattle as a line cook, dishwasher, and delivery man. He kept making music in the background, though. At first, he played drums in small neighborhood bands, and then he slowly started to play around with his own voice. Over time, a voice that was different from everyone else's and easy to recognize began to form. Then, a scream came from the Seattle basements, where kids like Chris were having a hard time getting by. Not an appeal for help, but a statement: "I'm still living." Growing up wasn't a place Chris Cornell wanted to go back to. No one dared to open that door again. But it was from that place that he came out, with a voice that could never be replaced and a mind full of wounds. Early career. During the late 1970s, when most American teens were into disco or rebellious punk, Chris Cornell, a young man who used to wash dishes for a job and struggled with addiction, turned to music to help him get through the day. He was in a house band called the Jones Street Band and played drums in it. Later went through a few more groups without leaving a permanent impression. But it wasn't his skill that made him stand out. Every beat of the drums and every word he mumbled to himself came from his inner turmoil. Something new happened in 1984. Chris started the band Soundgarden with two friends, Kim Thale on guitar and Hiro Yamamoto on bass. When it first started, Cornell did both jobs. He played drums and sang lead, which was an unusual combination that showed how independent and quiet he was. Chris didn't really take on the job of lead singer until 1986, when drummer Matt Cameron joined the band. His famous voice could finally rise without any limits at that point. At that time, Soundgarden never sounded like anyone else. Their music was dark, scary, and disorganized, mixing metal, punk, doom rock, and odd rhythms. Chris Cornell was the emotional center of it all. He could make his voice soar like a blade cutting through the air, and then it would go quiet, shaking like a secret being whispered in the dark. The group signed with the independent label SST Records in 1987 and put out the EP Screaming Life. It was a rough, angry, unfinished statement that got a lot of attention in Seattle's underground scene. A year later, their first record, Ultra Mega OK, 1988, came out. It got Soundgarden their first Grammy nomination and brought them closer to mainstream fame. They were still on the edges, but they were getting there. These were the years when Chris started to figure out who he was as an artist. One who tells stories through sound, but one who never told all of it. Songs like Flower and Beyond the Wheel were full of mystery, sadness, and depression. Early calls of grunge that felt raw, honest, and untouched by market polish. Unfortunately, a personal loss had a big effect on his artistic path. The passing away of Andrew Wood, a close friend and lead singer of the band Mother Love Bone. From too much heroin in 1990, Chris was really sad. To honor him, he made Temple of the Dog, a special project with members of the band that would become Pearl Jam. The group's only record, Temple of the Dog, came out in 1991. Cornell and Eddie Vedder sang one of the most famous duets in grunge history on the song Hunger Strike. At that time, the record wasn't very popular. Later, though, it would be seen as a key moment in the grunge movement. A meeting of broken souls in a time that hasn't been named yet. Chris sang songs like Say Hello to Heaven, Reach Down, and Times of Trouble, not only to remember his friend, but also to the hurt part of himself. Temple of the Dog showed that Cornell didn't need a stage to shine. He just needed pain and a reason to make sense of it. Even though these early years weren't his most famous, they set the stage for everything that came after. One voice that wasn't like anyone else's, a soul that was torn open, and a way of writing songs that dared to explore the deepest parts of human feeling. Before grunge became popular, Chris was already ready. To be understood, not famous, and maybe finally to understand himself. A successful career. When the grunge wave came out of Seattle's damp basements in the early 1990s, Chris Cornell wasn't just there to see it. He helped make it sound the way it did. Cornell helped Soundgarden go beyond the limits of modern rock with a voice that had the raw power of a primal scream and the weight of a soul in turmoil. He made the band one of the unmistakable stars of the time. When Bad Motorfinger came out in 1991, it made a lot of noise right away. There was more to the band's sound than just its heavy, jagged sound on songs like Rusty Cage, Outshined, and Jesus Christ Pose. In their new musical map, Chris Cornell was at the heart. His dark lyrics, unusual song structures, and high, guttural wails became the language of a lost generation. The real high point, though, was the groundbreaking album Super Unknown, which came out in 1994. Soundgarden was the first rock band to win 2 Grammys and have a record sell over 9 million copies around the world. Songs like Black Hole Sun, Fell on Black Days, Spoon Man, and The Day I Tried to Live were both new works of art and easy for a wide audience to understand. The strange and scary music video for Black Hole Sun made the song famous and became a strange prayer for Generation X. Cornell didn't just start the trend. He also changed what a rock voice could sound like. His singing stopped being just high-pitched shouts in the metal style and turned into sobs and howls that sounded human. Soundgarden's album Down on the Upside, which came out in 1996 and had songs like Blow Up the Outside World and Burden in My Hand, was met with shock and disappointment when the band broke up in 1997. However, Cornell didn't go away. His first solo record, Euphoria Morning, came out in 1999. It was a journey through introspective, sad, and achingly beautiful music. At the time, the record wasn't a big hit, but it would later be seen as his most personal work. Cornell joined forces with 3X Rage Against the Machine members in 2001, which was a second big turning point. Audioslave will be made up of Tom Morello, Tim Comerford, and Brad Wilk. Classic rock, funk, and political themes were all mixed together in this supergroup, with Cornell's truly soulful vocals adding to the mix. Their self-titled album from 2002 went triple platinum and included hits like a Stone, Cochise, and Eye in the Highway. These songs presented Cornell's timeless voice to a whole new generation. It turned into a very sad and deep song called Like a Stone. Cornell seemed to be saying goodbye to the world in a whisper, though no one at the time knew how true it might be. Before they broke up in 2007, Audioslave put out 2 more records, Out of Exile, 2005, and Revelations, 2006. Cornell also wrote and performed the theme song for the James Bond movie Casino Royale during this time. Critics have said that You Know My Name, a fierce and beautiful rock song, is one of the best Bond themes in 20 years. Cornell is never afraid to try new things. In 2009, he released Scream, an electronic pop record produced by Timbaland. The project proved one thing, even though it caused arguments and disagreements among longtime fans. Not once did he fear breaking up to find something new. In 2010, Soundgarden got back together, and their next album, King Animal, came out in 2012. It was their first album on the Billboard charts in almost 16 years. Even though the guitars were still growling, Cornell's voice was deeper, wiser, and more toned down this time. His last album as a solo artist, Higher Truth, came out in 2015. It was a simple acoustic record that felt like a muttered goodbye. Tracks like Dead Wishes and Nearly Forgot My Broken Heart sounded like they were written by a person that had just come back from the edge. In his younger years, Chris Cornell sang like he was running away from himself. In his later years, he sang as if he were quietly cleaning every part of his soul. He was hurt but clear-headed, shadowed but filled with something deeply human. For more than 30 years, Chris Cornell sold more than 30 million records, was nominated for more than 18 Grammys, and was on almost every list of the best rock voices of all time, from Rolling Stone to Billboard. Music fans, on the other hand, didn't see his success in numbers. It lived in every second he gave the song his all, even when it gave him nothing left. We didn't want to remember that victory. It was supposed to be remembered forever. Scams and tragedies. Chris Cornell was never the kind of musician who looked for trouble. It wasn't like he smashed hotel rooms, shocked the press, or tried to be a rock star. But if you dug deeper, his life was one of the most complicated and scary music case files of our time. When he got into trouble, it didn't make the news. They were simmering quietly in the cracks of his mind. There was no sound around him. And it was that quiet that killed him slowly over more than 30 years on stage. Since he was a teenager, had turned to drugs to stay alive. It wasn't because he wanted to escape, but because he didn't know how to live any other way. Other kids were at school making friends and planning their futures. But Chris, a lonely and unhappy boy who couldn't connect with anyone, turned to drugs and music to feel better. And he took LSD when he was 13. That age, he had tried drugs. There weren't any options. Because his mind always felt like it was drowning, he was looking for anything that would bring it back to the top, even if it was only for a moment. Cornell never tried to hide the fact that he had been on drugs when Soundgarden started to get popular in Seattle. Even during the band's most famous years, he kept using, sometimes to write, and sometimes just to stay alive. He never claimed to be a perfect artist, and he never made drug use look cool like it was a rock and roll thing to do. It was an essential part of him. Around the beginning of the 2000s, when Audioslave was at the top of their game, Chris's drug and drink abuse caught up with him. He lost everything. His health got worse, and his performances started to get worse. His voice, which was the most precious part of him, began to falter. Cornell checked himself into therapy and then went to a treatment center on his own. In the years that followed, he didn't use drugs or alcohol, doesn't have any drugs, booze, or substances, But he could never get away from the demon that scared him the most, even after he got rid of the ones he could see. A bad mood. A person named Cornell once said that sadness is like a heavy rain that never stops. In public, he never lost it or acted crazy, but he always seemed to be in a deep place. Some days he just couldn't get out of bed, and at shows he sang to fill the void in his mind. To some, he was a famous artist with a family and a heritage. But those things no longer meant anything to him. He said over and over in interviews that he felt detached from his body, lost, and like he wanted to disappear. Fans thought the artist was just thinking about things, which is normal for sensitive people, not asking for help. When Chris released his solo album Scream in 2009, which was a pop electronic collaboration with Timbaland, the rock world was very angry. The record got bad reviews and was seen as his biggest mistake as an artist. Some people said it was a surrender to the norm and an odd drop. Cornell had never seen his own crowd so angry, but he didn't fight back. He told her in a quiet voice that he was free to try new things and get out of his comfort zone. Being rejected by the people who used to look up to him was a quiet but devastating blow for someone who had always lived on the edge of the world. Over the next few years, his friends, family, and co-workers started to notice changes in him. He got thinner, smiled less, slept badly, and slowly became hooked on drugs again, this time prescription drugs like Ativan. The drug, which is used to treat anxiety, can become dangerously unstable when abused, causing people to become paranoid, lose control of their impulses, and think about committing suicide. Mistakes in words during live shows, a distant look, late-night phone calls, and a deep sense of emptiness, even when in front of thousands of fans, were all warning signs that things were going wrong. But Chris Cornell, who was very good at hiding, never let anyone really see what was going on. Cornell had a quiet avalanche of tragedies inside him, including addiction, depression, friends betraying him, and being alone at work. The heavy weight of what he had left behind. Not one of these things by itself brought him down, but all of them added up over time, becoming a shadow that got darker and heavier over time. He carried this weight throughout his career. Some people might not have liked the song when they saw him walk out on stage and scream like he was breaking the sky apart. He may have only known how to cry out for help one more time. Everyday life. When it came to his personal life, Chris Cornell was very private, even though he was always in the spotlight because of his music. And he never used his family as part of his artist image or flaunted them. Instead, Cornell guarded his private life like it was the last thing standing between him and the world. People could praise his voice, but they were never allowed to touch the man behind it. Susan Silver was Chris's first wife. She was the famous manager of Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and other important bands from Seattle's grunge bubble. In 1990, they got married and had a daughter named Lillian Jean. Susan was both his wife and his business partner for more than 10 years, taking care of plans, contracts, and everything else behind the scenes. It became harder to tell the difference between partner and boss over time. They got a divorce in 2004 after years of quiet strain, and the breakup was anything but calm. Chris sued Susan, saying that she was keeping personal things from him, like expensive guitars, manuscripts, and royalties. The court case went on for a long time and became one of Cornell's deepest emotional wounds in the years after Soundgarden. After going through such a hard split, Chris seemed like he might give up on the idea of having a family altogether. Then, by chance, he met Vicky Karagianis in Paris. She is a Greek-American writer and public relations expert. The friendship started quietly, without any big news, and grew on its own. Through marriage in 2004, they had 2 children, Tony Cornell and Christopher Nicholas. Chris discovered a new kind of belonging with Vicky. During the years they lived together in New York and then Los Angeles, he was soberest and healthiest. It was also during this time that he truly enjoyed being a husband and father more than ever. I remember Cornell saying, "When I get home, I don't want to be a songwriter or a performer. It's all I want to do as a dad. Pick up my kids, take them to music lessons, eat dinner, and read books." One time, he brought his daughter Tony on stage to sing with him in a song called Christmas. There wasn't a show. It was a crucial time. A dad who used music to connect with the kid he was afraid he would have to leave one day. Within that small group of people, he was no longer Chris Cornell, the famous rock star. Chris was his name. He had slipped, relapsed, and broken up, and now he was learning how to love in a kind and honest way. Even though he kept his involvement in social issues, especially those involving children, secret, Chris Cornell was very busy. The Chris and Vicky Cornell Foundation was started by him and Vicky in 2012 to help poor kids, victims of domestic violence, and people who have been trafficked. The project wasn't talked about much, but it quietly gave money to many campaigns and became part of his legacy. Fans saw Cornell as a voice. He was an unbending artist to his co-workers, but to his family, he was just a man trying to do the right thing, even if he didn't always know what that was. He held on to his honest personal life until the end, like a man who had lost everything and was now just trying to protect a home, a hug, a meal, and a song for his children. It's easy to turn almost anything into a product these days, but Chris Cornell never did that with family. It was hidden deep inside him, in the most secret place. If there was one thing that kept him going through those rough years, it might have been this: the last years and the strange death. In Chris Cornell's life, the last few years were like a solemn and complex chapter in a book. Light and darkness were intertwined. As if looking for a last way out, the artist walked a line between the two. After a long fight with addiction, he continued to write, perform, do charity work, and stay sober. But something behind those quiet eyes seemed to be slowly going away, and no one noticed until it was too late. Chris said that after putting out Higher Truth in 2015, he was closer to himself than ever. His music became less complicated and more acoustic. It was full of thought and a desire to get better. Under the name Songbook, he started small tours that were more personal. He played alone, told stories, and played songs from Soundgarden, Audioslave, Temple of the Dog, and other acts he admired. The fans saw a change. He looked more sensitive and sad, less stressful, but farther away. Even so, Cornell kept making a lot of art. Among the songs he made were The Promise, which was a tribute to the victims of the Armenian genocide, and Nothing Compares to You by Prince, which was haunting and felt like a goodbye. He put all of his energy into the Chris and Vicky Cornell Foundation and gave money to covert attempts to stop child abuse and trafficking of people. Other people at work said he looked more stable and alive than he ever had. Things weren't quiet, though. Chris started taking his prescription drugs again, mostly Ativan, which is an anti-anxiety drug that can have dangerous side effects if taken for a long time or without supervision. He lost weight, had trouble sleeping, and became more and more distant. He sang off-key in his last shows, not paying attention to cues and forgetting words sometimes. But for fans, it looked like they were tired. No one took it as a sign to be careful. The night of May 17, 2017, Chris played with Soundgarden at Detroit's Fox Theater. It was the first night of their tour in the US. Members of the audience said he looked tired, shaky, and had faraway eyes. Still, the show finished powerfully with Slaves and Bulldozers, and he added a verse from Led Zeppelin's In My Time of Dying that no one saw coming. There shouldn't be any mourning when I die. Nobody knew it would be his last message. Later that night, Chris called his wife Vicky at the MGM Grand Detroit. In her memory, his voice sounded slurred and confused, like he was probably high on drugs. He simply said, "I'm tired. I may have taken an extra 8 of an alarmed." Vicky asked hotel security to check on him. At approximately 12:15 a.m. on May 18th, they forced open the door and found Chris hanged in the bathroom with a resistance band. Attempts to revive him failed. He was pronounced dead at 52. The coroner ruled the death a suicide by hanging, but the toxicology report complicated the narrative. 7 substances were found in Cornell's system: Ativan, lorazepam, barbiturates, caffeine, pseudoephedrine, naloxone, and others. None were at lethal levels, but experts noted that the combined side effects could trigger paranoia, dissociation, impaired judgment, and impulsivity. Vicky stated, he did not intend to take his own life. He loved his children. That wasn't Chris when he was sober. Cornell's sudden and mysterious death shocked the world. Global media outlets reported the news. Thousands of articles, tributes, and analyses flooded the internet. Hashtags like #RIP Chris Cornell and #Say Hello to Heaven became the grief-stricken language of fans. But as mourning unfolded, so did speculation, ranging from concerns about overprescribing to theories of foul play. One theory with some grounding is that Cornell's suicide was not intentional. but the result of an Ativan-induced psychological break, causing him to act out in a mentally impaired state. However, a darker, more tangled, and far more controversial theory began spreading on Reddit, YouTube, and Twitter from 2018 onward. According to some accounts, Chris Cornell was allegedly involved in a covert effort to expose human trafficking and child abuse networks, possibly including high-profile individuals in politics and entertainment. Some believe that he was funding investigations and working with organizations aiming to uncover these hidden systems. Unverified sources claimed Cornell may have uncovered something dangerous and that his death had been staged to look like suicide. Though no concrete evidence supports this, proponents pointed to irregularities, delays in security response, inconsistencies in timeline, and how quickly his body was processed. What fueled this theory even further was the suicide of Chester Bennington, lead singer of Linkin Park and Cornell's close friend, who hanged himself on July 20, 2017, on what would have been Chris' 53rd birthday, just 2 months later. Some believe Chester was investigating abuse related to his late adoptive father and was planning to go public. While the official story says Chester was devastated by Chris's death, others suspect both men were collaborating on something much larger, something dangerous. Though no evidence conclusively links the two deaths to any conspiracy, the eerie timing has led many to ask, could two men who had overcome addiction, who seemed stable, fulfilled, with families and careers on the rise, really choose to end their lives in the same way, just weeks apart? Fans began revisiting lyrics, performances, and final interviews in search of clues. Some pointed to In My Time of Dying as more than coincidence, perhaps a coded farewell. Others saw it as a spontaneous gesture from a sensitive soul, now overanalyzed by a grieving public unready to accept loss. But regardless of the cause, one truth is painfully clear. Chris Cornell's death was not a simple impulsive act of despair. It was the culmination of decades spent wrestling with depression, dependency, expectations, disappointment, and a soul constantly torn between love and the abyss. He tried to hold on to music, to family, to hope through the strength of his voice.